Hey Mo, Jason, and Michael. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm so excited to talk to you guys about the Earth
The
and
whole
Earth
thing.
signs. And Earth signs. Yeah, this is the first episode in our Earth sign series, in our sign series, and we're talking about the Earth signs. And of course, you guys know how I do. I have to bring in people whose charts pertain to the topic. So we have a representative of each earth sign, of each sun sign. And I guess, yeah, we'll go around, we'll say our SMRs. And of course, I'll kind of give the mic to you guys to introduce yourselves, talk about a little bit about your practice. And we'll start there. So, Mo, would you like to kick us off?
Sure.
Start with your
Hi,
SMR. Don't forget that.
of course. Hi, I'm Mo. I love talking about my chart. So I'm a Taurus sun, Sagittarius moon, Pisces rising. Um, my practice is mostly Hellenistic slash medieval oriented in terms of its techniques. I am a huge fan of the subdivisions of the zodiac, and those of you who don't know and are late to the party, I just wrapped up a series on the decans with Pow on our podcast called the Fixed Astrology Podcast. So, oh, I also do tarot as well. So a lot of my astro tarot relationship is informed by the decans and the narratives behind them. So it's been really cool to spend the past year deepening that relationship and understanding. Yeah.
And if you're like, what the hell are the check-ins? What is Mo talking about? Don't worry. We are going to record a whole episode about it with Pal. So TBD, or TB to come. I don't know. That's to come.
Forthcoming.
Forthcoming. Thank you. And Mo, okay, so yeah, you take clients at this point, right? And you're doing consults. Yeah, no?
Yeah, so my consults are open again, but I am on a referral slash existing client basis
Cool.
only. So if you
Hell
know
yeah.
people and really want a reading, get referred.
Awesome. Yes. And of course, you joined us last season with Jake Green to talk about the lot. So if you haven't checked out that episode, you definitely should. All of you are returning guests, so we'll shout out to all of our old episodes. But yeah, Taurus, our Taurus representative, thank you for joining us. Michael, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Michael J. Morris. My pronouns are they, them, their. And I have Taurus on the ascendant. My sun is in Capricorn and my moon is in Gemini. And I'm an astrologer, a tarot reader, an artist, a writer, an educator, and a facilitator. My consultation practice is called Co-Witchcraft Offerings. And my approach to astrology is primarily rooted in the Hellenistic tradition with a focus on some modern techniques like the use of major and minor asteroids, which Kirah and I talked about on an episode, I think it was last season of the astrology show. And then I also approach my work, my astrology, from an explicit queer feminist orientation, and then also bring decades of study and practice in dance and yoga and Butoh and Reiki and other embodied movement practices, embodied healing modalities, as a way of centering the body as both the site of where we make meaning, but also where we do some of our most important healing. And I think that that fits really well with astrology because the body is the meeting place between the earth and sky. It's literally what's described by the ascendant, where the sky meets the earth as our body comes into the world. And that's the starting point for each and every natal chart, and sort of the starting point for my practice as well, is always starting from and coming back to the body.
Awesome. Yeah. And I was blessed enough to receive a reading from Michael on my birthday, my 30th birthday. It was so amazing. And the way that you incorporate the asteroids into your readings is just, I'm still thinking about it. I'm still thinking about Hercules on my moon, and like I think about that like every day. And the Zeus of my ascendant revelation has stuck with me too. So yeah, still beaming over that, and definitely check out our asteroids episode. And you also did a workshop about the asteroids for fresh voices, and I think that's on your site, right?
Yeah, that's available on the digital downloads page for my site and my, what else? What did I say? Oh, Astrology and the Body that I talked about
Okay,
at the Fresh
cool.
Voices Summit the year before. And then some other talks that I've given are all available for download on my website.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
And finally, Jason K, welcome. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Kirah. Yeah, Sun, Moon, Rising. So I am a Virgo Sun, Gemini Moon, and also Virgo Rising with Mercury in Virgo. So very focused in one direction. Yeah, as far as my practice, I mean, I guess it's primarily a study practice at the moment. I don't really take clients, but it's been mostly influenced by traditional Hellenistic astrology with a little bit of medieval and Renaissance mixed in, especially influence from kind of the horary traditions. But I am also a diviner through more. I kind of take up oracles like other people take up languages. So I enjoy reading with tarot, geomancy, I-Ching, a little bit of Lenormand, and recently I've attempted to pick up reading with dominoes, which is actually like really fun.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah, but my main training background is sort of in the somatics world as well. I no longer practicing, but was trained in massage therapy in a variety of different modalities, energetic and kind of more manual. And also I have a master's in acupuncture and was practicing acupuncturist for a number of years. And then went on to kind of work in residential mental health, doing neurofeedback training with mostly adolescents and young adults.
Awesome. Yeah. You are such a Mercury incarnate. Like the way that you like I would say borderline divination obsession, and not to say that you're obsessed with divining, but just like the methods, you just do so many different types of divination. And I just find that to be so goddamn mercurial. And so like, yeah, the embodiment of that magician prince, I just, the magician card comes up a lot. And I love it. And yeah, I like to collect mercurials. So and you fall so nicely into my 7th house. So yeah, I was going to say which episode we did, obviously the Mercury episode together. And I know a lot of Mercurials who love that episode. So that was way early, season 1, I think episode 4 or something. 3 or yeah, must have been episode 4. Check that out. We did that with Gabe Rosas, and yeah, it was really fun. We just talked about Mercury. So today, oh wait, actually we didn't really, I like to do that. I like to see how we know each other, and see if you guys know each other. So of course, how do I know you guys? I know Mo from Twitter for sure. And I think we just kind of ended up in some group chats together and just fell in love. We have our ascendants are conjunct. So yeah, we were just meant to meet. Yeah, to meet in person, but are you coming to Norwalk?
Probably not this year. Is ESAR still happening?
Yeah, I'll be there.
I will try for ESAR if money allows, but we'll see.
We'll see. Okay. Yeah, we'll link up eventually. Jason, we met at Norwalk 2019. And Michael, we have not yet met in person yet, but we met through, we've done this before. We're like, how do we meet? Instagram?
I think so. I think it was some social media platform. It was either Instagram or Twitter or something. And then, yeah, and then through connecting more through Fresh Voices and the and the podcast and just
Yeah.
being in community on Astro Twitter and things.
Of course. Yeah. I remember I was just like, we need to connect. And we just like did a Zoom call once for like an hour and just like got to know each other. Cause I was like, I want you to do stuff with me, but like, I feel like we should like talk first.
Exactly.
So that was great. And so do you guys, I'm assuming Twitter, you guys are familiar with each other?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Twitter. I know all of you through Twitter. And I think, Jason, you and I had a consult together at one point.
Yep.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
Astrologers, reading astrologers.
The way it should be.
Exactly. Awesome. Cool. Well, I'm excited to have you guys here. I'm excited to talk Earth. So I wanted to start by just talking about Earth on an elemental level and why I chose Earth to be first in the first place. I think a lot of people would think fire first. But through, teaching a lot of fundamentals last year, it's so weird to say last year, because it was like a week ago. but yeah, last year teaching a lot of the fundamentals and thinking a lot about the order of the spheres, the order of the cosmos, you might say, which is a theoretical, it's not really theoretical. I mean, I don't know if theoretical is the right word, but it's kind of a model of the of the cosmos, you could say, showing, and it displays it sort of in levels, or like an order, a divine order, you could say, which really shows like a kind of underlying system, and at the same time kind of has a lot of problems when you think about the way that like I was talking about this in my course or whatever, or something I was teaching, but it's sort of like they're trying to rank divinity in a way, because it starts with the ether, aka heaven, aka God, consciousness. What else can we call it? The void, we can call it, the source, the numinous, et cetera, et cetera. And then from there, we get to the stars that we call the fixed stars. And those include our constellations, the zodiac bell, all of that. And because the stars were fixed and unchanging, or at least appeared to be, they were considered like very divine, not as divine as heaven / God, whatever, but the next level of divine. And then we come down to the spheres of the planets. And we have our 7 heavenly spheres, starting with Saturn as the outermost sphere, and then Jupiter, and then Mars, and then the sun, the center sphere. And then we, did I say Mars? Sorry, Mars, and then the sun, and then Venus, Mercury, and the moon, the innermost sphere, of course, closest to Earth. And then we get into the elemental spheres when we get into the earthly plane. I'm skipping the sphere of the daemons for now, but we'll get into the earthly sphere where we all reside. And of course, basically, to go back to the idea of ranking divinity, the farther away you get from the ether and the closer you get to the earth, the less divine things become, basically. And because the reasoning behind that is the more changeable things are. So once we get into the spheres of the planets move, and they don't only move, they move, they stop, they go backwards, they stop, they move forwards, they run out of their declination. They do a lot of changing, which is considered, again, less perfect than the unchanging oneness of source. And so then you get down to the earthly spheres, and we are the most changeable of all, because not only do we like move around and stuff, but we die. We we go through this birth, life, death cycle, and all things within the earthly sphere are impermanent, yeah, that's the word, right? Permanent, not permanent, impermanent. Okay. So yeah, once we get into the earthly spheres, they also have levels to these four elements. We start with fire, and then air, and then water, and then the densest element, earth. So I wanted to start with earth, start from the core and work our way outward. And so yeah, to start, I wanted to kind of just talk about the earth element and just like when you think about earth, like what comes to mind, even if we're not thinking about it astrologically, just elementally, what sort of imagery comes up for you? And I'm going to just start with you, Michael.
Well, I love that you gave that articulation as to why we're starting with Earth, and Earth being kind of at the bottom of this hierarchy of divinity. Because actually, I mean, what we call the triplicities, this organization of the signs into groups of three, actually predate the attribution of the elements to those groups of signs. And Chris Brennan actually has a great article. Let me see, what's the name of that? It is called The Planetary Joys and the Origins of the Significations of the Houses and Triplicities, where he really describes where or how we might understand. It's a hypothesis as to how the elemental attributions came into the zodiacal signs and why we might think of them in this relationship. And it has to do with looking at the because it wasn't that way originally. Originally, the triplicities were discussed as these groupings of signs in relationship to sometimes the winds, the four winds or four directions, which corresponded symbolically and mythologically to the four seasons, but then also the planets that ruled them in terms of the trigon lords or the triplicity rulers. And so before we even think about what does Earth mean in the astrological system, these three signs that we're talking about today, Capricorn and Taurus and Virgo, were already associated with one another due to their rulership through triplicity by Venus by day, the moon by night, and Mars as the cooperating triplicity ruler. And then in Chris's analysis, we can see how each of these, the planetary joys, when they're arranged on the zodiac in terms of the angular triads, in terms of the midheaven, the IC, the ascendant, and the descendant, that we can see that the triplicity rulers are organized around these four axes, such that the fire rulers, the Sun and Jupiter, are the houses where they have their joy are on either side of the midheaven, so up at the top. And as you were describing those spheres, that fire of the four elements is the highest and descending down from there. And the triplicity rulers of the air signs, Saturn and Mercury, are around the ascendant, which is rising up. The triplicity ruler of the earth is down at the bottom, Venus and the moon having their joys on either side of the IC, at the farthest down. And then Mars, the remaining triplicity ruler of the water sign, is around the descendant, has its joy in the sixth, right around the descendant, and is moving downward. And so we have fire at the top, air rising, water descending, and the earth at the bottom. And so we have this arrangement of planetary rulers before we have the arrangement of the elements, but then it corresponds across these multiple schemas in the Hellenistic tradition. I think it was Vettius Valens was the first one to attribute the elements in descriptions of the triplicities. But of course, this triplicity system existed before then. And maybe the last point, and then I'll take a breath and let someone else talk, is I love that you said it is a little bit problematic that in these heavenly spheres, there's a kind of ranking of divinity, because not only the earth put at the lowest, or that which is farthest from the divine, the triplicity rulers of the earth signs are the two so-called feminine planets. And so then we have an association between femininity and the earth at the bottom of all things. And I think that corresponds really obviously to a patriarchal, hierarchical way of thinking that puts the earth as like a raw material resource to be consumed and extracted and manipulated by human culture and civilization in the ways in which that has also been attributed to the bodies of female assigned people, women, and femme. And I'll just gesture towards, we don't have time to go into this, but I'll just gesture towards the fields of ecofeminism, queer ecofeminism, and eco-womanism that have been critiquing this association between the earth and woman, or the feminization of the earth, in ways that produce mutually constituting hierarchical dualism, such that woman or femininity is always subordinated to men and masculinity, and the earth is always subordinated to the human. The body is always subordinated to the mind. People of color are always subordinated to whiteness, and so on. And we can see how these dualisms play out all through Western civilization, including the astrological tradition. And I'm not, and that is worthy of critique. It's worth thinking about as we're focusing on the earth element as the starting point, as the base of all things, that as 21st century astrologers operating from hopefully justice-oriented lenses, hopefully from feminist orientation, that we might critique, what does it mean that Earth is at the bottom, that the feminine aside, the so-called feminine planets are at the bottom, that before it was called the Earth triplicity, it was the triplicity ruled by Venus and the moon, and so on. And so those are sort of my initial thoughts as to how do we start thinking about the Earth triplicity, but I'll hand it over and see what other folks have to offer.
Thank you so much for that, though. That was so rich and such a great place to start off from, like the association of the earth element to femininity, to this more, you could say receptive. I don't really love that word receptive all the time, but you could say more receptive qualities, or I like to say introverted a lot of times, to quality as opposed to the other binary masculine, which is more associated with fire and air. Mo or Jason, who wants to pop in?
Sorry, my mind is just like
right
now, because like, I was thinking it's interesting how like the assignment of the different triplicities to the different angles or pivots kind of mirrors like what I was thinking about when I think about Earth. Like I think about I can't remember if this was an extension of like, the four humors in terms of like the temperaments and how they're assigned to elements, but I'm just thinking of the fact that like Earth in particular is like one at the bottom, not from the sense of like, oh, this is like less than or what have you. I reject all of that, by the way. But it's like I think of the IC especially as like the root. It's the thing that holds the chart up. And as someone who is, a neuroscientist by trade, I think about, the mind-body question a lot. And, I'm coming from a biology background rather than the psychological background, which my partner comes from. And, it's almost like, it's interesting how when I say we, I mean like Western society, not necessarily the people in this meeting, but Western society has like put the intangible on like a pedestal for so long, when it's like without the vessel to, have the experience or go through things, like what meaning does all this intangible stuff have? So for example, like color perception, without eyes, you can't perceive color. If you don't have the right, cone and rod receptors, you can't perceive color a certain way.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like it's really interesting that like, there's this like rejection of, the material, because I think there's this constraining element to it that, maybe, and I would say that this is true even in other cultures where there's this elevation of like the intangible over the tangible, because there's this hope that we can escape like I guess the burdens that come from, being, encased in a meat suit and like having to survive and having to do all these things to maintain ourselves. But I think it's interesting how like in terms of the angles, like in addition to being the thing that literally holds everything up, it's like, we all like return to that, like there's sort of this like death like signification there. So I think it's interesting that like I would argue the moon is a benefic, but that's just me. Like two very benefic planets are just kind of like having their joys, like either side of the IC, which represents like going back to the earth. So it's like, this is where we come from and this is where we return, you know, inevitably. And so like there's some weird symbolism about that that I feel gets lost in all of the, you know, pop astro epithets of this is all about chasing a bag and like liking materials and whatnot. But I feel like there's this conversation about the struggle to accept our mortality and like embodiment that I feel gets lost when talking about earth signs.
Wow. That's definitely a word. Yeah. The return home, or the homecoming aspect of it, even when we're talking about getting back into our bodies, you know, nourishing our bodies. When you bring up the moon and Venus, you know, kind of flanking the IC, almost their places of joy. To me, I just think about how the moon and Venus have so much to do with both nurturance and like safety, but also just deliciousness, like the richness that comes from the earth. Literally all of everything that we eat, right? Like not everything, but you know what I mean. The Garden of Eden, like that is earth. So yeah, okay. I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna give Jason the mic because I'm just kind of talking with like the pictures in my brain. But Jason, love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, this is a great conversation. Yeah, it's so interesting. With everything that's been said so far, where I think my thoughts were going initially is was very informed by my Chinese medicine training, which has a different elemental schema, and really element is not even a good translation of what's really the 5 phases. So it's really kind of more these moving processes that are like, yeah, so slightly different correspondences, but that's where my head goes, because thinking about earth, that's associated with the melancholic temperament, and the qualities associated are dryness and cold, which is interesting with kind of the it kind of creates this interesting contrast with what was already said about the moon and Venus as the triplicity rulers, because that coldness and that dryness is actually like a removal, kind of creates a sort of distance. And they're also the qualities that, you know, to Mo's point about mortality, they're the qualities that are sort of most opposed to like what requires life to be sustained, which is like heat and moisture. And so, yeah, to me, like earth, my mind jumps to the melancholic temperament, which definitely has this like greater proximity to death, to mortality, and to, you know, literally the grave in the earth itself. And thinking about the 2 different ways that an excess of melancholy can go, sort of, and I guess thinking about this more from a psychological or personality standpoints, but that can either sort of encourage an interesting and often problematic like disidentification with kind of like the core of life itself, and sort of feeling of that like remoteness or removal from, and we're definitely going into like, you know, Saturn's rulership of Capricorn here, just like that distance from community, from life. And then, you know, the Virgoan sort of like excess of dryness, like going more towards greater abstraction and kind of like, but again, both are sort of have this potential for like a distancing. But from a physiological standpoint, a temperament that is overly dry and overly cold is one that is actually prone to sickness. And so like there's also kind of this precarity that enters into the physical constitution that I think affects people's psyches in a way that either, you know, in the sort of caricature of the Saturn archetype of like a Scrooge type of character that is like kind of like, you know, is this person even human kind of personality, or one who is very much in contact with the preciousness of life, because that like proximity to mortality is more present, which I mean, again, it's not a guarantee, but a lot of people dear to me just have, you know, lifelong struggles with like chronic illnesses and things of that sort. And the tenderness that I appreciate in them, a lot of that really comes very directly from their own struggles with their own body. Like that's felt, it's so tangible. It doesn't really even have to come from like a abstract like values standpoint. It's like the grip on life itself is kind of more tenuous, and a lot of these qualities in the sort of Chinese like cosmology, there is crossover with the earth element, but it's actually a little bit more similar to the metal phase, which is associated with autumn. So it's that kind of dying away of things and kind of stripping of the material back into kind of the more spiritual. So yeah, I mean, this discussion of Earth just like brings in all of these paradoxes that, I don't know, it's just really interesting. I'll just stop there and see where we go from there.
No, I love that, because it's true. There is that really interesting paradox around like Earth being this place where, again, we come from, like life grows out of, but also it's where we return, in that, you know, impermanent, sublunar, less than divine sphere that we all live in. So yeah, thank you for that reflection. I love that you brought in your back, like, yeah, the Chinese medicine perspective of that as well. Yeah, when I think
I'm thinking about it too, because it's really cold right now and very dry in this apartment. So I'm feeling the melancholy in my body right now.
I hear you. I mean, my apartment too gets so dark and cold and dry. Yeah, I hear you. If it wasn't for this like nice LED light I have lighting up my room and me leaving the heater on in here all day. Yeah, but I was just gonna say, like, when I think of Earth, I think what comes to mind for me, always the number 4. But I think of grounding, basically. Like that's kind of always the first word, at least, that comes up when I think of Earth. It's just the stability, the consistency, and the grounding nature of it. It's just the density, I guess, of it, which again can be something that is like grounding in a way that is you know, centering and makes you feel like you're coming home, or in the way where it's depressing and it feels like a burden and you're trapped in it. You know, and so yeah, it's but still that core sense of consistency and dependability. That's, we kind of talk about people in that way, but that's just like the element in and of itself. Like, not to say that things don't change with Earth, because obviously it does, but it's in a way that yeah, it's definitely the least changeable of the 4 of the 4 elements. And I find that Earth, people with, like, you know, I guess heavy Earth or more prominent Earth in their charts, do have this sense of acceptance I would say acceptance for, and comfort maybe around just being in this physical world, like just living in the material, being a material girl in a material world, you know. It's just this ability to yeah, I would say acceptance is the word that I would use for a lot of Earth heavy people. And yeah, let's get into it. Let's get into the different the three different expressions of Earth in our zodiac. And I wanted to start with Capricorn because I wanted to start with Cardinal. And Michael, you mentioned before the four directions or the four winds. When we talk about cardinal signs, which is, cardinal is the modality. We're talking about the signs where when the sun would enter that zodiac sign, we would see a change in winds, a change in the directions of the winds. And cardinal basically just means, change in direction, right? And I think it's worth it to say that when we talk about modalities, cardinal, fixed, immutable, we're talking about sort of like you could say like the movement of the energy of the earth energy, of the elemental energy, the way that the element moves, I guess you could say. So yeah, with cardinal signs, we get the signs that begin seasons. And with Capricorn season, we have the winter solstice. The beginning of winter or spring, depending on where you are in the world. And so yeah, with cardinal Earth, do you want to kick it off, Michael, and just kind of speak to that energy? Just how do you conceptualize cardinal Earth?
Well, I mean, I think that so the cardinal signs, especially in the ancient literature, are often referred to as the movable signs. So it's like something's happening, there's actions. And I think of the cardinality as action oriented and also initiating, like as you said, whether it's initiating the season of winter in the northern hemisphere or the season of summer in the southern hemisphere, there's the start of something at all the cardinal signs. And cardinal Earth, especially cardinal Earth ruled by Saturn, there is a focus of starting something, of initiating something, but it's often a concern with initiating things that are going to last and endure. I think of it as building or putting something into place that can support us for a long time to come. So it's really different than the cardinal initiatory quality of something like Aries, which is like really fast and quick and then it's done. The Capricorn, there is an orientation towards beginning and initiating and starting something, but with the intent that it's going to continue and last. So there's actually like maybe some similarity to some of the ways we might also talk about Taurus. There's also some really important distinctions, but because they're both Earth and because Taurus is a fixed sign, but Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, which is the slowest moving of the planets, there is this like enduring quality to Capricorn and the ability to endure, to put in the necessary effort or the work or the energy to build what is needed or what is necessary. And I think in terms of like some personality qualities that we often associate with that, but I think it could show up in other forms as well. That could be things like a hardworking disposition or being especially diligent or the kind of like focus and discipline that's necessary in order to sustain ongoing effort that's needed to build and to put things into place in the ways that we might associate with Capricorn. And then I also, because it's one of the two signs ruled by Saturn, I also often strongly associate Capricorn with an orientation toward or an allegiance to the past. That's one of the ways that I differentiate between Capricorn and Aquarius, is that Aquarius is often more forward looking or more oriented toward the future, or an allegiance to worlds that are yet to come and the rules and the systems that we need in order to support and sustain those worlds to come. Whereas Capricorn, there can be more of an allegiance to the past, towards tradition, towards what's come before, and maintaining or sustaining and carrying those things forward. And so even though there is this initiating quality and starting something new, Capricorn, we're starting something new by bringing the past with us in some way. We're carrying that which has come before into the present moment. And I think maybe that's one of the other things that I strongly associate with Earth signs in general is presence. And Kirah, you were talking about the ease or acceptance with this terrestrial, tangible reality and materiality. And I think that with that, there comes this, just more quality of being grounded in that particular kind of reality and present with it in some way. That part of being present, even as Mo was saying, like that part of what it means to see is to have this very material, physiological, optical apparatus. And so part of presence, maybe for all the earth signs, is about that ease and acceptance of our material condition. And with Capricorn, it sort of sits at this pivot point of like bringing the past into the present in some way. Those are some of my initial thoughts. I think there's probably a lot more we can say about Capricorn, but yeah.
No, I love that. That was great and really thorough. And part of what you were saying about, Capricorn and being ruled by Saturn, kind of something that I always think about when it comes to Capricorn, both Capricorn and Aquarius, and basically the signs ruled by both Saturn and Jupiter, but especially when we're talking Saturn and the aspect of distance. I always kind of think of the idea of perspective. And so to me, Capricorn is concerned with building on, and yes, for the long term, absolutely, but also in this, I think it's so, I don't want to say community oriented necessarily, but definitely like society oriented in a way, or it's not necessarily just trying to build, a home for themselves for the long term. I think Capricorn is so, Saturn has the perspective of everything, it's the farthest planet. So it's building for the long term, and it's building structures for society for the long term. And it really does have this, this kind of bird's eye view, which I tend to associate more with Aquarius, but it's, I think, true with Capricorn. It's more like, we have the perspective, but I kind of picture Capricorn as like getting down and dirty with it, like actually like boots in the ground, hands dirty building, whereas Aquarius is a lot more, it's the air sign, it's a lot more intellectual about it and ideas oriented. But the Capricorn is like, let's build these structures for everyone, for society. Jason, do you have any thoughts about Capricorn that you wanted to share?
Gosh, about Capricorn. My brain was already drifting to Virgo. Let's see.
No, I want to get everyone's opinions on each side.
All right, cool. The sort of solidness and dependability qualities of Earth, I think, are what jumped to mind. It's interesting. Like I kind of almost see like each of the Earth signs as like a different type of like surface that you can stand on. And for sure the Capricorn feels like something stonier, something that'll hold up my weight in a way that I don't have to sort of test and think about. It has a surety to it. It's as kind of like, to my mind, the Earth sign that exemplifies that sort of resistance to change. So it's like the longest lasting one. It's the one that sort of preserves. And thinking also too about the combination of dryness and coldness as a preserving agent. And you have both of those elements, and a body in the ground is going to actually mummify, not decompose. I think too, the mountain imagery also comes to mind with Capricorn in a way that that can show up as more of that like standing apart piece that Earth can sometimes exhibit. What else comes to mind, Capricorn? Humility, I think, is the other big thing that jumps to mind, especially for everyone I know personally that really shows up with that quality. And it's a humility that, yeah, doesn't draw attention to itself. It exists and can be relied upon, and it's it's also the reason why my Capricorn friends are the ones I want to be the quickest to give credit to and sort of like hold up on high, since they seem less likely to want to do that for themselves. Yeah. Yeah, come back around. There's another
No,
thought
that was
brewing, but
no, that was great. And it pinged some things for me too. I mean, the mountain imagery, I think, is a big one, and just goats in general. And I don't know if any of the three of you have anything to say about the mountain goat versus the sea goat. And I know nothing about the sea goat mythology, but I'm told that one's more accurate to describe Capricorn. Yeah, does anyone have anything to say about the goats and the mountains?
I mean, for me, the mountain imagery really jumped out. Like,
Yeah.
so I think of Capricorn. So, like, I have this weird view of Capricorn. I don't really view Capricorn as like, yes, there's an allegiance to the past, but like, I weirdly see Capricorn as like the progenitor of tradition, right?
Mm.
Like, so when you think about mountains and how they form, or even things like canyons and plateaus and all that great stuff, right? Like, processes that happen years. And I think that part of the reason, like, and this speaks to like the rulership Saturn has over the sign, like, I think because the changes that Capricorn tends to make are things that are more um, incremental and like almost imperceptible, like, unless you like really look back at the past to see what's different. Like,
Mm.
this is something that Pao and I talked about like on the Cap Decans episode, which is coming out like sometime this weekend, I think. But like, I remember saying to her that I felt like it's kind of like aging as a process, right? Think of like the Saturnian concept of time, right? Like, when you see yourself every day, like, you're not thinking, oh, I'm like different. Oh, like, it's just you're with yourself every day. You're like just living your life, all thoughts, all vibes, whatever. But then it's not till you look at pictures of yourself from even like a year ago where
Mhm.
you're like, oh, I look a bit different. And when did this happen? I never really like noticed, right? So like, I feel like that's the kind of change that Capricorn tends to go for. And it's like, we can appreciate the awe of like a mountain or like a canyon or something, but it's like, I think if we were like, there every day with it, it really wouldn't look that much different, and we would, think nothing of it.
Mm.
So that's what I think about when I think of a Capricorn.
I love that, because especially the attention to the incremental time, and I love that between Jason and Mo, that both of you are giving a sense of like almost like geologic time, and it's like so deep and slow that the kind of the dailiness of it seems as if nothing's changing, but over generations we can see what's changing. And it reminds me of a way that I often talk about Jupiter in Capricorn. And Jupiter, I have 3 planets in the Sun, Jupiter, and Neptune in Capricorn. So I think a lot about Jupiter being in its fall in Capricorn. And one of the ways that I talk about it with clients, but also thinking about it in terms of my own life, is that Jupiter is a planet that we associate with abundance and expansion and growth. But in Capricorn, ruled by Saturn, there's all of this constraint and restraint and limitation. And I often use the metaphor of bonsai, where there is absolutely growth, but it is slow, it is minute, it is developmental, through like really deliberate choices, because there's not going to be a burst of like the oak tree sprouting all new branches and leaves every spring. It's like, it's going to be so deliberate in its approach to time and change. And so even though these are 2 different metaphors, the geologic time and the bonsai, what it has in common is this like gradual incremental intentional deliberateness that I think that we maybe could associate with Capricorn between those two metaphors.
You go, Jason.
Oh, gosh, yeah, the geologic time thing is like making my brain spin
Go
up for
it.
sure. Because I think also over that like long arc of time, it is also kind of what happens to a surface, a medium, when it's subjected by like the winds of change. And so like there's also an accident piece to it too that happens over. You can't be in perfect control over that long of an arc of time. It's an accumulation of things that have eroded and things that have like accreted to it. And what builds up in those small, like with those small and incremental changes, it's just something that could never have been sort of like imagined in sort of a single lifetime or in a single imagination. It becomes so much greater than the sum of its parts and can never have been sort of like planned out by an architect in some ways. And that to me, like those things that have been, any encounter with something that has been subjected to that long of a time, I think is also very intimately tied to the sense of awe and wonder, which I think is yeah, I feel like that's something that I'm also wanting to kind of give to Capricorn in a certain way. It's the presence of a vastness that kind of, again, humbles too, right? Like to be humble and to be humbled by the universe and the vastness of time and reality. And trying to loop this back to the kind of ego thing a little bit, Saturn and Capricorn's association with like the sea and the ocean and like sailors, and like, but it is the unknown. So it's, the ocean is also space. It's also like the remote, like rarefied air of the mountaintop. It's everything that is like that was far away. And somehow, I mean, on a sort of sensory level, the difference in like subjective state of whether when you're looking at something that's like, only this far from your face, like close up, versus like when your eyes shift to a depth change that is like, miles and miles away, like where a mountain is, like through the space of a canyon, that feeling of awe and expansion also comes along with that too. So I think it's also a consciousness about what is always like going to be greater than like our singular like point of existence or life. Yeah, deep time. I love it.
Yeah, no, to kind of piggyback off of all that, and kind of bring it back to the mountain, the mountain theme, it just makes me think about, again, the idea of Capricorns having this sense of time and this acceptance of time, and within that, like reality, which, time is sort of a reality construct, right? It's like we kind of have this perception of time moving, but Capricorn placements, I think, have this ability to maybe not see the long term, but sense it and have an acceptance for time, and how things just take time. And that's why it's like, even if I can't see the top of the mountain, like I'm just going to keep going until I get there, and so that, everything we've been talking about with like this incremental time just kind of brought me back there. And then also the humility and the humble nature of Capricorn and of therefore Saturn. And we can think about it being, down to earth, right? Like that idea, because we like Mo brought up before, we do hear a lot about Capricorn just kind of being like chasing that bag, wanting to live this like luxurious life. They talk about that with both Taurus and Capricorn. which is very like not Saturn. But even besides that, like the just being able to, yeah, I don't know, just be of the earth. And I guess this is now bringing me to, you know, what am I trying to say? Like a love of land and of the earth. And I find Capricorn placements to be the biggest, what am I trying to say? Ecologists, but that's not the word I'm looking for. People who like want to save the earth, Capricorn placement. And I think the Pluto and Capricorn generation, in and of itself, like they have this reverence for the earth in a way that we don't really see in a lot of other generations, because they know that time's running out. They have this like huge awareness of time and of the necessity to excuse me, to restructure the ways that we're doing things to save us. And that's just something that really stands out to me about the Pluto and Capricorn generation, is just how they are. I'm obviously speaking very generalizing here, but that just seems to be a standout feature of their generation to me. Any closing thoughts on Capricorn?
A comment. It's funny how like I guess there is like an awe or a humbleness that Capricorns like can have. I just do know a lot of Capricorn placements who are not humble.
Well, I was gonna bring up like the harshness of Capricorn that can come up with Capricorn, and the coldness that can come up. And I think what it comes down to is like the reality, like the understanding of reality, and of just the way things are.
One thing I will say is that maybe it's not necessarily like coming from an egoic place like it would for like, like a Leo placement, but something that I've noticed about both Saturnians is that because they have this like keen awareness of certain features of like the constraints of like reality, whether that's, like the mechanics by which like the literal aging process works, or like just like the patterns that repeat in human nature, as is the case with Aquarius. Like,
the good thing is that this is the audio is being recorded still.
That's good.
Hello.
Okay, you're back.
Sorry. Okay, where did I cut off? My bad.
Something about Aquarius.
Okay, so both Saturnians, because they have this keen awareness of, the constraints of reality, both materially and socially, people who aren't ready to confront those truths may accuse either of having a God complex, which I have seen, but I feel like that's just coming from a place of not understanding like the constraints that they see and have accepted. Right?
Definitely.
Well, and I think if we're going to sort of explore what sort of that more egoic expression of that looks like, in a way it feels very like well-deserved in a certain way, maybe just internally, but I think from externally too, because when you're so clear about like what the sort of what the constraints, what the laws of necessity are in any given situation, that gives you a lot of sort of strategic advantage, right? Like you know what it is you have to account for to maximize for greatest like benefit or for the desired outcome. And to the extent that someone kind of hones that sensibility of like what is required to get to where I want to go, and succeeds in mapping the path to achievement, there's a lot of like very tangible laurels to stand on, right? Like it's like, well, I did all this, so And I think maybe there's a certain way that all the earth signs share a type of haughtiness that is like probably related. um, we can get into that with the other stuff.
Also, yeah, I have to say I'm not an earth sign, but I feel like I'm a honorary earth sign because my chart ruler is in an earth sign. So I'm gonna give myself that. But no, we will and so therefore I agree. But I think I'm gonna transition to talking about Taurus now because yeah, we're gonna go from cardinal to fixed and talk about the most fixed, the most earthy earth sign, Taurus. So Mo, do you want to take it away and tell us about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be a bit spicy and argue that the most fixed sign is Aquarius.
Okay,
I articulate that at another time. But,
I'll note that for the air sign episode.
Note that for the air signs, and
I'll get their opinions.
But no, like, I really like that you started with Capricorn and moved us through like going from the cardinal to the fixed and then finally the mutable, because the way I kind of like interpreting, I guess, the signs, but also like I've been thinking about this from a tarot perspective as you move through like the minor arcana. Like we start with the cardinal cards, move to the fixed cards, and then finally end with the mutable cards. And the way I think of fixed signs is they're all about stabilizing, continuing, maintaining. Like sometimes it has like a purpose, a lot of times it does not. So the idea that, Taurians can be goal oriented. I've seen that come up, especially if it's around like material. I don't think that's quite right. And, like as a Taurus that, you know, um, isn't really down with all the, like, I like nice things, but like, I'm not really down with all the like overly capitalistic, gluttonous depictions of Taurus. You know, full disclosure, I have someone who's like struggled with like eating habits. So the idea that, Taurus just wants to eat all the time is also very weird. So, you know, I get the idea of like Taurus wanting to maximize pleasure. That's the way I see Taurus. It's a sign that knows what it likes, it knows what it needs to sustain itself. There's this huge nourishing quality to Taurus just because it's the place where Venus is in domicile. It's her preferred domicile, but not Libra. So the air signs can also enjoy that. And it's the place where the moon exalts. And, like I really think that people underestimate the like nurturing qualities of Taurus. I really think a lot of agrarian, like growing, knowing how to like properly take care of like plants, people, yourself, so that you can grow, right? And I don't know, like I just think of the fact that the moon and Venus are more wet planets, but Taurus is a cold and dry sign. So I think there's something about the cold, wet quality of Taurus that combines well with the wetness of these planets to facilitate like the foundations of life. So that's just the way I see Taurus. So yeah.
Love that. I love that a lot. Yeah, just to kind of piggyback off or to come back to what you were saying about the depictions of Taurus being like gluttonous or just like wanting luxury things. And what I think of when I think of Taurus is the five senses. Like that's always what comes to mind with Taurus. It's sensual. And Venus, the ruler of Taurus, just wants to feel, it wants to feel good, not just feel like Venus wants to feel good. And that involves, pleasures in all forms, beautiful music, delicious food. It's not about eating all the food. It's about having amazing, delicious food. It's about having, great sex, or just like being draped in fabrics that just feel good on your skin, because that's what Venus is about. It's about, I think, as a lesser benefic, it's about like the simple pleasures of life. It's just like the things that feel good on a moment to moment basis, like listening to your favorite song, or just having a bite of something that's just like scrumptious. So yeah, it's like to not overdo the stereotype. It's just like, yeah, it's not about having like all the food, it's not about having the most designer clothes. It's just about having things that make you feel good.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I love what you said about Taurus being a cold dry sign, being an earth sign, but the moon and Venus having this being one of their favorite places in the zodiac, and the fact that their moisture combines with the environment, the natural environment of Taurus, creates this really fertile and stable place for life to form. And I think that's another big part of Taurus is it's stable. And that's why the moon loves it, because it's just like, okay, this is like a good environment. I can grow some stuff here for the long term. Yeah. Jason and Michael, I'd love to hear your thoughts about Taurus. Whoever wants to go first. Let's start with Michael, because Michael's a Taurus rising.
It's true. I am. I have a lot of thoughts about Taurus. Actually, I mean, my bias towards astrology is like when I'm asking someone's sign, I'm more likely asking their ascendant than their sun. I associate like personality traits and things like that far more with the ascendant than the sun. And so because of that, I think I identify more with my Taurus than with my Capricorn. And I think I agree entirely, Kirah. Whenever I think about Taurus, I go first to the senses, to the sensual, to the embodiment of pleasure and satisfaction, and the ways in which that's related to the Venus rulership and Venus's desire for experiences of pleasure, for embodied connection that Venus unites. It brings things together. And in this fixed earth sign, that's an embodied kind of connection, a physical form of pleasure, whether that's erotic or otherwise. But I do think there is something particularly erotic about Taurus, and maybe that's the Venus and the moon bringing the moisture into the cold and dry, and creating the conditions for generativity and creativity to thrive in that place. And it makes me think of, when I say the erotic, I am talking about the sexual and the sensual, but also in a more kind of expansive way. And the ways that Audre Lorde writes about the erotic, Black lesbian, feminist, poet, warrior, writer, Audre Lorde, who actually had her moon in Taurus, so an exalted Taurus moon. And she has an essay called Uses of the Erotic as Power. And I want to read at least one passage from that, maybe two, that echo some of the things that Kirah was already saying. She writes in that essay, "For the erotic is not a question only of what we do. It is a question of how acutely and fully we can feel in the doing. Once we know the extent to which we are capable of feeling that sense of satisfaction and completion, we can then observe which of our various life endeavors bring us closest to that fullness." And so that sense of, end quote, that sense of satisfaction, that sense of not only doing things that are pleasurable, but feeling deeply into that experience. And then that setting a kind of standard or expectation that's not, again, it's not about the capitalist indulgence of I need all the things or more things. It's I understand the depth and quality of satisfaction of which I am capable. And once I've known that, I can hold my whole life to that standard. There's a standard quality, I think, to that. And then there's another passage that I think really reflects some of the Venusian qualities of Taurus, where she writes, let's see, I probably won't read this whole thing, but let's see. We'll see where we go. She writes, quote, "The erotic functions for me in several ways. And the first is in providing the power which comes from sharing deeply any pursuit with another person. That sharing of joy, whether physical, emotional, psychic, or intellectual, forms a bridge between the sharers, which can be the basis for understanding much of what is not shared between them and lessens the threat of their difference. Another important way in which the erotic connection functions is the open and fearless underlining of my capacity for joy, in the way my body stretches to music and opens in response, hearkening to its deepest rhythms. So every level upon which I sense also opens to the erotically satisfying experience, whether it is dancing or building a bookcase, writing a poem, or examining an idea. That self-connection shared is a measure of the joy which I know myself capable of feeling, a reminder of my capacity for feeling. I guess I'll stop there. There's, it's a whole essay, but this idea of not only feeling deeply into any of these experiences, whether it's fucking or dancing to music or building a bookcase or writing a poem or examining an idea, and then sharing that. And that's the part that feels so Venusian. It is the feeling deeply in an embodied way. What is the felt quality of this experience? But then sharing that quality with others, I think, is deeply related to Taurus because of the Venusian rulership. And I think some of the other quality, in addition to that erotic, pleasure-oriented quality to Taurus, other things, just to echo some things that Mo was saying, is like consistency and reliability and persistence, the kind of if not resistance to change, the tendency away from change that we see in the fixed signs in general, but especially here in an earth sign as well. Yeah, and then I guess my last thought, or a last thought for the moment, is that because of Venus and then because of like my own experience as a Taurus rising, I also associate Taurus pretty strongly with the arts and artistic practices, especially embodied and material-based artistic practices. So, for example, I have Taurus rising, my Venus is exalted in Pisces, and both my twin and I are artists. We have the same chart, obviously. Well, I don't know if that's obvious. We have the same chart. And I'm a dance and performance and movement and ritual artist, which with multiple degrees in dance. And my twin is a visual artist who works primarily in painting and sculpture and perfume and fiber and other media, and also has multiple degrees in art and teaches at the Art Institute in Chicago. And so it's like, there's something about that Venusian quality that gets elevated because of not only ruling the Taurus ascendant, but also the ways that it shows up being exalted in Pisces, that I think really pulls forward some of those artistic qualities. But I think that that's innate, this desire to create something that appeals to or satisfies or enriches the senses, I think, is maybe like one of the impulses toward artistic practice that I relate back to Taurus in some way. So
Definitely.
the erotic, the artistic, and so on.
I want to jump in and say that you brought up something that I think about when I talk about all the earth signs. And I think it's because Venus is like the daytime triplicity lord. I think of, even Capricorn, I think of them all as artisans. They just have their different media. For me, Capricorn is the architect.
Yeah, that's why I talk about it too.
Like Taurus is like, the perfumer, the like painter, the dancer.
Florist, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Virgo, I think of like a jewelry maker or like something that requires like fine motor skills because of like the mercurial nature. But like, I just love how, I guess, out of all the earth signs, like I feel like Taurus has the most obvious association with the arts, but like the earth signs as artisans and craftspeople, don't sleep on it, period. That's all I'm gonna say.
I agree
Here
with you.
for it. Yeah. Jason, do you have Taurian insights to share?
I think my insights have a lot to do with the feeling of, so Taurus is my ninth whole sign house, and it's I've noticed just how important a theme that is for me, as far as a thing that I reach for, as a thing that is like not something that I always have immediate access to. And there's always been a direction of growth, because I think my relationship to embodiment was more of a journey rather than kind of the thing that I felt like I started with. And and just looking back at the arc of my life going into bodywork, coming from being still such a kind of heady, mental, head in books kind of kid. There was a really important like balancing that happened to really like drop into my senses, into feeling and being conscious from within my body in different ways. And there's a contrast, but it's not a contrast with Capricorn, in that kind of some of those themes that I was talking about, that all of us were talking about, of distance and remoteness by Saturn's rulership. With Venus's rulership, Taurus has that immediacy. So it's kind of the opposite end of that. It's just like close, all the way close up, to where our senses can be most in contact with, like, brings into intimacy the thing that is outside, that is other. But it's also the knowing of the other through the senses, that what comes in through sight, through sound, through touch is like, oh, there's a presence of something that is not me. It's also like a way to come into not self, which I think is worth bringing up, just again, to sort of contrast against the stereotype of the self-indulgence of Taurus that some people like to point to. Even it's actually a lot about going beyond self when you're that in touch with your senses. And again, for me, that has been like a really important growth arc, because I didn't have a lot of friends when I was growing up, and it was just very like isolated in many different ways. And getting in touch with my senses enabled me to be more comfortable connecting with others, and knowing of others through an expansion of kind of sensory awareness has been really profound too, because it's, you're not just the person that I see with my eyes, you're like, what your voice lends to kind of the composition of your self to me. And if we were in the same room, if like scent was in there, and then there's sort of the beyond the traditional five senses, but that sort of energetic presence of like bodies in space, that just opens up a whole nother level of information and knowing of another person that is in a very non-intellectual and very non-abstract way. There's a isness to others that is mediated through the senses.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that just made me think about all the Tauruses in my life, and major people with major Taurus placements, that are just the best people to touch. They just touch so good, and they give good massages, and they're just the best people to hold hands with and cuddle and just touch. And it just makes me think of when you talked about like the proximity and the like, way up closeness of Taurus. That's kind of what came to mind, is the physicality of it in general. Which makes me think about how Uranus is in Taurus, and Rahu is about to move into Taurus. If it's not already, I'm like looking at my watch, like it's going to tell me. But that's soon to come, and how we're about to experience throughout, 2022, this sort of like, when I think of Rahu and then also Uranus on Rahu, which I have natally, it just to me is like pumping, like turn up the volume to max, like bass bumping in terms of like the energy level in that area of the zodiac. So, Uranus is already exciting things and kind of like putting electricity into the environment that is Taurus. And then the North Node, or Rahu, comes in and sort of just amplifies that to a huge extent. And I just remember Austin Coppock talking about Uranus and Taurus, and I don't know if he was talking about when, eclipses were going to be there, but regardless, just talking about how being in person, this is before the pandemic, he was speaking about this too, which is just wild to think about, but how there's going to be a novelty to physicality and to being in person and to, just like almost like mundane things will kind of become exciting again. And now, thinking that was over 2 years ago that he said that. I think he was just talking about Uranus and Taurus, like a future like Venus and Uranus conjunction or something, but it's very much applies to what we have coming up in 2022, what we kind of already have. And so it's just going to kind of keep being turned up a notch, this like in-person or real life tangible experiences, basically. And Jupiter will be there next year, which is wild to think about.
Oh my God. No, I think it's interesting that Rahu's going in, because I mean, I've been dabbling in Vedic recently, and Rahu, ironically, is the planet of illusions, right? And, when that collides with Taurus, which is, arguably like very material and probably the more tangible of most of the signs, I think there's just going to be this like collision course with like, I guess like a hyper real, hyper like idealized version of, what it was like to do simple things. Like I remember like the Uranus Taurus stuff during the early pandemic being like learning how to bake bread or just bake period, and like needing to have like peak, like peak organic even, because when I think of Taurus, I also think of the organicness of it. And I kind of contrast that to Libra, which, is where Saturn exalts. And it's not that it's not genuine. It's like this artificialness because of the Saturnian structure and like the idealized like form. So it's like almost like this hyperfixation on like reclaiming the organic, maybe not as perfect, but feels really good, and wanting to get in touch with that again, I feel like will come when Uranus and Rahu eventually conjunct. Like, so that's something I've been thinking about a lot.
Yeah, that's such a great point.
Can I jump in on that?
Yes, please.
It made me think of something, and then I have two other thoughts that I was thinking of when Jason was speaking. I'll try to hit them quickly. But that contrast between Taurus and Libra that you were pointing to, Mo, makes me think of in the broadly. I mean, this is going to be the delineations or demarcations of this are going to be different on different disciplines, but broadly within the period that we know of as Romanticism, especially in the arts, there's often this contrast between naturalism and artifice. And the naturalism, it's all theatrical, especially if we're thinking about like theater and dance and performance and things like that. But the naturalism is aiming towards this organicism and like making things look natural or get in touch with natural ways of moving. Whereas the artifice is like the going to ballet class for 15 years so that you can acquire this very reified technique that's there's nothing even remotely natural about it, and not pretending to be either. And so that contrast between the naturalistic and the artificial, or the naturalism and artifice that we see in Romanticism, feels like a nice touch point with what you're describing between Taurus and Libra. And then when Jason was talking, you made the point that embodiment was more like a journey than like a place that you began at or arrived to in some way. And that made me think of something that I think about with all the earth signs in different ways, which is this practicality that all of the earth signs are concerned with. And by practicality, I also mean practice, like a thing, both what you do, but also how you do it. And in Taurus, maybe this thinking about embodiment as a practice, something that we practice coming into more and more embodiment, or embodiment in different ways. What does it mean? How do we be a body? How do we do ourselves as bodies? That thought came to mind. And then, the senses as a meeting place with the other, of like we're actually, the more in tune with your senses you become, the less isolated or individualistic you become. Made me think of, I can't remember which phenomenologist it was. It was either Maurice Merleau-Ponty or Edmund Husserl, but this idea of the life world, that as the more in tune we become with the perceptual apparatus, we get into, oh, this was Merleau-Ponty, we get in touch with what he described as the skin of the world. And the skin of the world is this sensorial meeting place between our senses and all that we are sensing, such that the contours of that become something like there's no real differentiation between self and other in that place. It almost gets into this like almost tantric place of I am that, like the hamsa of I am that which I perceive. And so that the deeper we get into sensation and perception, the more we realize that we were never separate from this world in the first place, that what it means to be me is to be in touch with all that is other, or that we would perceive in some sort of rational apparatus as other in some way. So those were my three thoughts: the naturalism and artifice, the embodiment as a practice, and then the skin of the world, where the sensory apparatus brings us deeper into our disindividuation than it does our isolation, something like that.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for adding that. Oof. Feeling
Taurus
good. Just like,
reflections.
yeah, it's like, ooh, I feel good in my body right now, just talking about Taurus. Well, let's move on to our final earth sign. Our Virgo, one that is near and dear to me because my chart ruler is in Virgo. So I kind of consider myself a pseudo Virgo, or, something like that. But Jason, yeah, do you want to kick us off to talk about Virgo, our mutable earth sign?
Sure. Gosh. I mean, yeah, with the heavy concentration of Virgo in my chart, sometimes it's like too close to my face to see clearly.
Yeah, where do we start?
Yeah, just be in it. Yeah, so we've talked about the sort of general qualities of Earth having a lot to do with of stability, of kind of solidness, and Capricorn and Taurus kind of bring out that quality in different ways. But Virgo as a mutable sign, and Mercury as kind of having this quality of changeability, it kind of makes me think of the earth can't support life unless there is that change quality is like preserved within it. It can't be sort of allowed to become a completely solid, dense block. It needs, it requires a porousness, breathability inside of it in order to be in service to life. So I actually kind of think about Virgo as relating to the things that allow for that space, that create that space in the solidness of Earth, so that that change can continue. I think I often jump to the image of mushrooms and mycelium, particularly because, I mean, I'm not an expert in by any means, but just thinking about how its function in the ecosystem is both to link organisms through these networks of essentially like mutual aid, where the resources and information is being shared between other organisms, but also something that breaks down organic material and essentially like renders it available for as nutrients, again, as like base nutrients for the life forms around it. And that for me like makes the kind of like analysis like stereotype of Virgo like much more like concrete and embodied, I think, because otherwise it would seem like it's like, well, shouldn't Virgo be an air sign, right? Because it's like so like heady and abstract, and like it's like analysis is a sort of distant, not very solid thing. But when I think about it as kind of this process of breaking down into constituent parts, then it's something different. It's interesting too to think about that breakdown piece for myself, and also which kind of compared to the general Earth quality of like practicality. I often find that like my own expression of like Virgoinness is like not very practical in some ways, because sometimes there's just like so much pleasure in the breakdown itself of the analysis of the kind of like what is this made of, you know, like what do I see in these parts, and like how do they all fit back together, is that has enough satisfaction and kind of, for me, like a sensual pleasure to it, that I kind of don't really always need to do something with it. I don't have the sort of like end goal kind of aim. Like sometimes that's enough. And uh, yeah, so it brings
Somebody
questions from.
has, do you have Venus in Virgo too?
I don't. It's
Okay, it's in
mine's in
Leo. It's in
Leo.
Leo. Okay.
Mhm.
The pleasure in it is what got me. I love that though.
Totally. Yeah. So it's but again, like going back to that in service to life piece, and kind of some of my beginning remarks about kind of some of the crossover I see with the metal phase and the Chinese 5-element or 5-phase system. Virgo is as kind of like a steward of what is supposed to be returned to the earth, that is supposed to be like redigested and reincorporated back into the earth. Yeah, I was reading very excitedly about a project that's been going on for a while, and just it used to be called the Urban Death Project, and now it's a company called Recompose, and it's this specific process of kind of like accelerating the decomposition of a human body back into kind of like a mass of soil, and kind of this project of kind of alternative or green burial, or, well, in this case, not burial, but of alternative funerary practices. And yeah, I was like, it's like, oh, Virgoing again, because that is that decomposition breakdown piece and the returning of what the wholeness of life like requires to keep going. Yeah, those are a lot of pieces that I link up, which I guess also in the sort of maybe more 12-letter alphabet kind of approach to things, where Virgo is associated with the 6th house. I feel like you can come to that service place also through this symbolism without going there. And I think about the roles that are not center stage, roles that are like supportive and that are off to the side of, that kind of facilitate things happening rather than necessarily doing the thing itself, which also loops in really closely with how I've started to think about Mercury as being very associated with kind of that ministerial role, because it never is, you know, a sign apart from the sun. Yeah, so what are those like small details and logistics that need to be taken care of to sort of enable this whole other process to happen? And I think I've been thinking about all this too, just because I've found myself largely through circumstance, like in having moved away from kind of the somatics and like bodywork world into kind of doing more sort of customer support type things, and like just finding a completely different expression of like my Virgo and instincts like coming up, and like just seeing like what all the links and processes are, and like optimizing them, and setting the pleasure of setting them in order so that things like run smoothly and correctly. I'll start there. There's a couple other points on my list, but I'm sure we'll get to it as we talk about it.
That's like precisely why I love hiring Virgo moons so much. I have a lot of Virgo moons working for me because they can link, they take pleasure in that. That's what's so great about it for me. I mean, everything you've said, I've just been like beaming and so excited about. And one thing in particular, just to kind of piggyback off of what you were just saying, with Mercury being associated with service, and Virgo specifically being associated with service, and removing that from the association with the sixth house, and really thinking about it as being a mercurial thing. And just like what you said, its relationship with the sun, its proximity to the sun. The sun we're going to look at as, the representation of the king, or, the leader, you could say, of whatever group. Mercury always being so close by. I think you said what word you said. What word did you use to describe Mercury's kind of proximity to, like,
Ministerial?
Yes, thank you. Because I think of it as, Mercury is the messenger, and the messenger of the king, kind of delivering messages from the heavens to earth, or from the kingdom to the people, what have you. And that in itself is a service role, like that. Just like you said, being able to take care of the little things so that the entire system can function. And system is like my number one Virgo word, because it is so much about like, what are all the moving parts? And Virgo has this ability to really examine each and every part, and seeing how they functions and how it all functions together as a system, as a whole. And yeah, just the thing about how Virgo kind of governs this process of bringing us back to the earth just made me think about how Hermes, ushering souls into the underworld, and how Mercury was the only sort of being, or what have you, that could cross all those boundaries, could cross from heaven to the, to the earthly realm, to the underworld and back. So that just like sprung all those things off of my head around that. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. That was beautiful. Mo, do you have things you want to say about Virgo?
So many thoughts. Like, as somebody who has both the lot of spirit and lot of fortune in Virgo.
Ooh, and we can say a domiciled of Mercury as well.
But I have Mercury in Gemini, so it's a little interesting. I've been thinking a lot about the duality of Mercury, like just examining my own like lot lord. And like I really love what Jason was saying about the like breaking things down and extracting them into their like fundamental parts. Like I think that's something that both, Virgo and Gemini are very good at. But like for Virgo, it's almost like there's like a utilitarian sort of piece. And it's like whether you're thinking about like, I think of the fact that in the 12-letter alphabet, or just like the body scheme, like Virgo's associated with the digestive system. And what you're doing is breaking down food to extract like the nutrients that will be repurposed so that you can like build all your proteins and all that great stuff. And so like what I think is the difference between like the Gemini expression versus the Virgo expression is that I think about what Amaya said to me in a consult, actually, about air signs, but in particular Gemini being like a place of evolution. It's like, let's break things down and like just throw together random permutations and see what we get. Whereas like the Virgo Mercury piece is like, let's extract things and like repurpose them for something else, not necessarily to put them back together, but it's like this part could be useful here or this part could be useful there. And I think that's a very loud expression of sort of the mercurial aspect. But I also think of like, again, artisans, right? Because even though Venus is fallen in Virgo, I think of like there's this like striving for material sort of perfection, which is some weird undercurrent that like I feel Libra and Virgo have in common. They like want things to be structured in a certain way. But I think because of the mercurial nature of Virgo, like there's this understanding that like things can be put together in any way. Because they're striving for this ideal, it's like it's hard to find the right combination that like makes you feel good or that is like appealing to the eye. So I think that's really interesting.
Love that. As someone with excuse me, Venus in Libra and then also my Jupiter in Virgo, I can attest to that. Yeah, like I feel like the difference with Venus, it's very much just like I want it to look good, with Virgo, it's like even if it looks good from the outside, if I know something underneath is a little fucked up, like that's going to bother me forever, so like Virgo needs to it needs to be good from the inside out, or from like, all the pieces of the puzzle have to be perfect. With Libra, it's sort of just like, as long as it's poised and beautiful on the outside, like that's good enough. The combination is me and my crazy ass. But yeah, Michael, I'm sure you have thoughts on Virgo to share.
I do. I mean, my first thought is actually sort of building on the things that Jason and Mo were already pointing to in terms of this, like breaking things down and recombining things, or extracting and recomposing and things. I think whenever I'm thinking about and talking about Virgo, the first thing that comes to mind is is that Virgo is adept at transforming the available materials into their most useful or effective or efficient form, whether that's like processing plant materials into herbal medicines, or doing like deep data analysis and transforming that data into something that's like useful and applicable in practical ways. Like it's not just abstract numbers, it's like, what do we do with that data? I think all of those are sort of Virgo qualities that I associate with Virgo, is this transforming what's available into more useful or most useful forms. And that requires, maybe the other keyword that I think of often with Virgo is a real skill at adaptation, and maybe even language that comes from Adrienne Marie Brown, who has Sun in Virgo, by the way, which is intentional adaptation. That it's not just constant change for the sake of change, but how do we participate in the reality that the material circumstances, material conditions are always changing. And Virgo is really adept at adapting inside those constantly changing material conditions in ways that have a clarity of intention, which isn't the same thing as like the persistence and unwavering quality of Taurus, but rather an ongoing responsiveness to what is changing. That the constant adaptation, it also requires that ongoing attention and analysis of what has shifted, what has changed, how do we revise the plan or the procedure or the methodology in response to the conditions that have changed. We thought it was going to be this. Now we're halfway through this process. It's become something else. To make this plan effective, we have to change the plan. And so the outcome is kind of like, I actually often steer away from the word perfection with Virgo, although I do think that in terms of a personality trait, a perfectionism might present itself, but that more it's that constant refinement in response to what has changed are the qualities that I associate with with Virgo. And just to give a little bit of language to that, what I referenced as intentional adaptation, that comes from Adrienne Marie Brown's book, Emergent Strategy. So there's a whole chapter on intentional adaptation, which I kind of think of as like one of the handbooks for Virgo that I could offer to Virgo folks, people with prominent Virgo placements. And she says about intentional adaptation, she says, quote, intentional adaptation is the heart of emergent strategy. How we live and grow and stay purposeful in the face of constant change actually does determine both the quality of our lives and the impact that we can have when we move into action together. And then later in that same chapter, she says, but this element is not about pure adaptation, which has led to every functional and dysfunctional condition we know. I'm talking about the combination of adaptation with intention, wherein the orientation and movement towards life, towards longing, is made graceful by the act of adaptation. This is the process of changing while staying in touch with our deeper purpose and longing. And some of that language of staying in touch with the deeper longing and the intention of moving towards life reminded me of some of what Jason was talking about in terms of Virgo being in some way like the stewards guiding us back to our connection with the earth, back to our connection towards life and livability, which of course in this moment of immense climate collapse, crisis, chaos, requires ongoing adaptation, not in the sense of relentless innovation for the sake of innovation, but for a purpose. How do we come back into or forward into right relationship with life and livability? What needs to change in our practices and our procedures and our methods and methodology in order to be well with this planet that is undergoing such immense change? How do we change with the planet that is in so much upheaval and crisis at the moment? Yeah, those are some of my thoughts on Virgo.
It's beautiful. Yeah, I think, oh, you go, Jason.
Oh, I love all of that. And it just made me think about the perfection piece and the perfectionism, which, yeah, it can show up as kind of coming from a motivation of control, and because of the way that Virgo can see with such like granularity, the possibilities for control are basically infinitely expanded, which can become a very neurotic way to do things, approach life. But thinking again about the earth and what sort of can be given back to the earth and what enables life to kind of continue with its processes. And actually, this jumps off on kind of what you were saying, Kirah, about like when something's like not correct, like on that level, it's just like, this is just going to bother me. And it's that acute sensitivity to the thing that is inhibiting some fundamental process that is happening. And like the virtue that Virgo can express is like very immediately and quickly identifying what that hitch is. And when it's in healthy expression, it's like, okay, this doesn't belong here now. And things are allowed to flow again. And the life processes are allowed to continue. Because it's when there's too many of those little blocking points, there's an instinct about what is going to go wrong if those things are not corrected. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that sensitivity can be applied in very effective ways or very neurotic ways.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to bring up too, is the detail-oriented nature of Virgo that folks often talk about. And yeah, it is just like you said, this acute sensitivity to just like, I would just kind of say the details, like every single piece of the system or of the way whatever it is functions. and being able to discern, I would say discriminate. I think Virgos have an incredible sense of discrimination, and just being able to sort things into, like you were talking about before, what's most useful, or what is it going to be most useful for. And I always think of Charlie and Chocolate Factory, like the golden egg thing, or the golden goose egg thing, and like the bad egg, the good egg, like that's always what comes to mind. I don't know why it's always that. But yeah, this ability to kind of be like, this isn't good here, this will work better here. And I think that's where we get the filtering quality of Virgo, and with that, like a purifying quality as well. Like I think of Virgo often as just trying to achieve a sense of, again, we could say perfection, we could say purity, and those words are so, they're nasty to me in a lot of ways, and they're kind of triggering words, but it is just sort of this striving towards that. I don't think that anyone, I shouldn't say anyone, but I'm not trying to say that all Virgos are trying to be perfectionists or anything, but I think that there is this idea that if I can see what's wrong and like I can fix it, then like I'm going to do that. I'm going to keep kind of striving towards perfection, even though, again, weird word, but but yeah, that's where we get the pickiness of Virgo. It's I think just knowing that things can always get better and things can always improve, and we're always in this like functioning, flowing influx system of constant improvement, or just maybe, again, I don't really like the word improvement, but refining is definitely a really good word. Anything else about Virgo? Yeah.
I've been thinking about everybody's like metaphors for Virgo, and for some reason, like just that progression through the final three cards of the Pentacles,
Yes.
it's just standing out to me in terms of like how loud it is, in terms of like the manifestations. So like the first, what is it, the Eight of Pentacles being like the tweaking, refining your craft, like trying to contribute to a process because you have that acute awareness.
It's practice. It's like continuous practice.
I really like the the Thoth depiction, because it's like a growing plant. It's like giving some of that agrarian metaphor. And then you move to the Nine of Pentacles, which is kind of like giving me like, the winemaker, like knowing which combinations to do where, like how long you should age, when you should bottle, like
when to
like
harvest.
Yeah. And then like just,
and the bird in that card
and
always reminds me of Virgo.
Literally, like
that goddamn bird.
It's like, I'm gonna kill everything that's eating my crops. Like,
yeah, it's just like every little, every little bug, every little mite or whatever, just getting in there. And yeah, like anything that's keeping my harvest from perfection, basically.
Right. And then like that last card, especially when we start talking about because there's this like implicit, like sort of decaying process that comes up. Like we talk about Virgo, because like, what is digestion, but like decay, right? And erosion. It's like this weird parallel that Virgo has with Capricorn, because there's this like eroding quality that's like going on. But like I think of it in terms of like, the mycelium, because fungi are, resident, what are they, scavengers or something, where they end up recycling nutrients that other organisms benefit from. And so I think like it's nice how everybody's depictions of Virgo brings this like imagery full circle, kind of.
Yeah, I love that. And I just have to bring it back to the first thing that you said, Jason, around, in order for Earth to function in the way it does, there needs to be this like cyclical moving, mutable process to it, which is that Virgoan sort of like changing, ever changing piece to it. It's like we're not just the static, fixed ball of earth. Like there's so much continuous change and movement around it. And that kind of we're not going to go here, but it reminds me of the Virgo being in the third house of the Themamundi. And often, and just thinking about the third house as a lunar space, and the process of birth, life, death, that whole birth, life, death cycle. What am I even getting at? Oh my God, Kirah. Just, I guess, cycles in general, and how it's often, I think, the third house conflated with Gemini and Mercury in that aspect. But thinking about it more as like this Virgoan process of like cycles and systems and processes. I don't know. That's just pinging things in my brain around Mercury and the moon, and how they do have a lot in common, basically, in different ways. But we won't go there because we've been talking for so long and I need to let you guys go. But I guess to close out, I just, as our earth sign advocates basically here, if there's anything that you want to speak to that you think the world should know about earth signs, that you think, to combat stereotypes, or just something that us other signs need to know to cater to our earth sign friends and loved ones a little bit more, anything to share? Like hug a Capricorn sort of thing. I'm going to call on someone soon.
Well, it's funny because the thing that I was thinking about was taking time.
I know my Aries moon is like rushing you, like, come on, earth signs, hurry up.
Yeah. Giving space, giving time, just with the earth element is not there. Their change is there, but it is a change on a not on a moment by moment basis. It's a much longer arc of time. And I think too, part of that is there's probably a bias towards solidity and form, and that also takes time, right? So like the first thought might not always be the trusted thing. It's like, let me like chew on that. Let me actually assemble what it is I'm trying to say. And I think especially for my Virgo brain, if there's like a piece missing, I can tell there's a piece missing of what I'm like trying to express, and like I want to like have that piece before I utter it. I guess thank goodness I have a Gemini moon to just blurt out stuff. So it's balance. But give Earth a little bit of space and time, and the thing that comes out is like, it's like, oh, okay, I'm glad I waited for that.
Yeah. That's a great point. Thank you for that.
I could go. So I've been thinking a lot about the hierarchy of spirituality, and I really like thinking about the earth element as the thing that grounds us. And how ironic that a lot of these spiritual practices that people are getting into nowadays involve like meditation, mindfulness, like getting connected with your body. I mean, even exercising and like eating well. Like, so I want to say that first of all, I think that the challenge or the dichotomy between like spiritual and like material is false. And I think that
snaps for that.
By getting rooted in the physical, like we can have greater access to the spiritual. Also, as a Taurus, albeit a spicy one, given all my fire placements, stop calling us lazy, indulgent, and like it's just, and I find that the idea that Turians are selfish is also not false. And I'm so glad that everyone had things to share about how indulging in certain senses is a bridge point for connecting. And I think that people should learn about like what connection means outside of like the virtual sense. I know that's hard with the way the world is, but I'm hoping that Rahu and Taurus will encourage us to get back to that.
Thank you for that.
Wow. I mean, most of what I was thinking is simply going to echo things that Jason and Mo just said, because one of the first things in terms of like, what's the message to the world from earth signs? Similarly, the first thing I thought was slowing down and the kind of patience of being present and letting things unfold over time and through duration. I think that is wisdom that earth signs hold very clearly. And then the second thing I was thinking was this false dichotomy, false binary between earth and ether or matter and spirit. I could not agree more. It's a false dichotomy. So maybe part of what the earth signs hold or offer is the realization of the divinity of earth. That if in this order of the spheres, if the divine is that which is farthest from earth, what if we offer a model in which we understand the divinity of earth itself, of materiality, of the body, of coming into attunement with the material reality that we're living through. And it actually makes me think of, I don't know her chart, but Alkistis Demek, who is a dancer and choreographer and occultist, and she's one of the publishers of Scarlet Imprint. And in an interview, I can't remember what podcast she was on, the interviewers made a presumption, and a presumption that I think is really rampant in astrology communities and occult communities and things like that, which was like, when did you have your moment of waking up from materialism? Like, when did you turn from materialism? And Alkistis says, I didn't. I consider myself a materialist because I believe that matter is spirit. They're not separate from one another. It's so this idea of like, when did you wake up to like, it's not all matter and give your attention to spirit? And as a dancer and as a choreographer and as a ritualist, she was like, all of my practice recognizes the inherent spirit and divinity of the body, of materiality. And it was it felt like things I've been saying for decades, but also like so clearly articulated of like, matter and spirit are the same thing. Like what you're talking about when you say spirit is also the body. It's not inside the body. The body isn't a shell or a vessel or a container. It is that thing. And I think that is something that I hope earth signs can offer to the world as a message, as wisdom, as insight, is like, how do we come back to an understanding of the inherent divinity of materiality?
Mic drop. Beautiful. Oh, we're going to end it there. Thank you guys so much for this. Oh my God, this is so nurturing and nourishing and grounding. Delicious. Can we tell the people listening where they can find you and learn more about you, or not? I mean, like, if you don't want people to find you, then that's okay too. Jason, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I just hang out online. You can find me on Twitter. At Jason K, JaySunkei. And I post occasionally on Instagram as well, mostly tarot spreads and of my adorable niece at Jason of Mercury.
Awesome. Thank you. Michael.
My website is michaeljmorris.co. And you can find me on Instagram at co-witchcraft offerings. and check the spelling because I'm dealing with a week of a lot of impersonators this week. So just check the spelling. And then Twitter at Morris Michael J.
Awesome. And Mo.
I am Austral Tour everywhere. So Austral is in like the first part of Australia, which is like southern. And then Tour, which is the first part of Taurus, pretty straightforward. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram, currently building a website, so stay tuned for that. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for hanging in there. If you're still listening, if you took a break, thanks for sticking in there with us. And we'll see you next time with water signs. Thanks, guys. This was amazing.
Thanks, Kirah. Thanks, Mo. Thanks,
Thank you.
Jason.